Hi, everyone. Thanks again for tuning into the Ideation Podcast. Today, we have a very, very special guest. He's been a longtime friend. His name is Stephen Robinson. Judge Stephen Robinson has had a varied career serving in high-profile roles in both the public and private sectors. Judge Robinson currently is a partner in the government enforcement and white-collar crime group at the law firm Skadden in New York City. Prior to joining Skadden in 2010, Judge Robinson served as a federal judge for the U.S. District for the Southern District of New York. He was nominated for that position by President George W. Bush in 2003. In 1998, President Bill Clinton also nominated Judge Robinson as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, where he served for 3 years. Now, first of all, thank you so much for carving out some time to join us for a few minutes.
Oh, thank you, my friend. It's so good to first see you again. I guess the last time we were together, we were having margaritas in LA.
That was true. Yeah.
So it's great to see you, and I'm honored that you asked me to join you.
You know, you've been one of those individuals in my life where over the years, it's almost like an onion peel. You know, there's like layers to your story that keep coming out. And, you know, when I read your bio, I'm like, man, this guy has done everything conceivable in the legal profession. And you have really a fascinating journey from childhood all the way to now. And I've had the privilege of hearing your story over the years. And I thought, you know, you would be a perfect guest to bring on because I think your story will inspire a lot of the listeners today. And so, you know, let's go back. Actually, I want to dive in because I want to make the most of our time together.
Sure.
You grew up in the Mercy Projects in Brooklyn with your 2 older brothers and your mother. And so to go from that place of a beginning, of an origin story, to where you are today is pretty miraculous. And so, like, maybe start off and tell us a little bit about your childhood, what that was like, because eventually you got from there and somehow all the way through Cornell Law School, and now the work that you do today. Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Great. Well, you know, as you said, I grew up with my 2 older brothers and raised mostly by our mother in the Marcy Housing Projects in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And my father left when I was about 8 years old. And so we were this insular family group. My mother was a very, very smart, very, very strong woman. My mother was brilliant. And if she had been born 30 years later, she would have been the federal judge. My mother went to college at 16, went to Virginia State College, a historically Black college, at 16, and was that kid, was just socially probably stifled a little bit, but intellectually, academically, super advanced. She got pregnant at 19 by my father, who had come back to college from having served in the Korean War. And so in those days, you were pregnant, you had to leave. And so they both left and came to New York City. By the time my mother was 25, she had 3 sons, my oldest brother, Chester, my middle brother, Guy, and then me. And then her relationship with my father started to fray for many reasons. I'm sure many that I was not aware of, but some, unfortunately, that I was, because my father was very physically violent with my mother. My mother and he were probably just not a good fit. And my mother, and you know, getting back to your question, had a very specific idea of what it meant to raise her sons in the housing projects of Brooklyn, New York. So we had no money, but my mother was committed to showing us as much of the world as she could. And so we would pile into the Greyhound or Trailways bus back in the day, and we'd go to Philadelphia and spend 1 night and 2 full days looking at, you know, the Liberty Bell and looking at Ben Franklin's home and where Betsy Ross, you know, made the first flag. We would go down to Washington and look at the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Memorial and the White House. We would go to Niagara Falls, and all of us, this small unit, the 4 of us, always staying in like the cheapest, you know, Motel 8 room, the 4 of us in a room. But it didn't matter. And my mother's commitment to us was showing us as much of the world as she could. So we grew up in New York. We went to all the museums. I mean, by the time I was in high school, I had probably been to the Guggenheim 20 times and the Met
Wow.
50 times and the Whitney. Every year she took us to a play and a musical and the opera and the ballet and the ice capades. And we went to the cloisters, and we went to one nice restaurant every year where we had to practice our table manners.
Wow.
And so what got me from where we grew up was my mother. The other thing, as I mentioned, she was one of the smartest people I've ever known. So I was a senior in college before I ever read a novel that my mother hadn't read.
Amazing.
When I was in college, if I didn't understand, when we read Ulysses by James Joyce, and I didn't understand what was going on, I didn't go to the teaching assistant. I didn't go to the professor. I called up my mother.
That's a smart
And
man.
I would say, we're reading this book. I don't understand it. She would say, send me the syllabus. And then every week we would talk about what the reading assignment for that week was. And then I would go into class and they would say, this kid is really smart. Simply repeating back what my mother told me. So reading was always a very big part of our life. Being part of the cultural world and life of New York in particular, but even, as much, we never got off the East Coast, but, we went up as far up as Montreal and as far down as Virginia, where our grandparents were. And that was what she taught us, was there was a world bigger than the projects. And if you worked hard, if you didn't complain, one of the things she would say to me all the time is, stop complaining, nobody cares. This one, and then she would correct herself. She would say, no, people do care. 80% of the people don't care, but the other 20% are actually happy you have the problem. So don't complain about it and move forward. And so she was all about grit and resilience that she showed us in her life, right? This 16-year-old who went to college, got pregnant, had 3 kids in relatively rapid succession, husband violent, leaves, and she was going to raise these 3 boys. Never complained. The other thing about my mother that I think was an unintentional, wonderful thing about her was my mother read all the time. And so what that means is she didn't do any of the other things that you would think a parent did. My mother rarely cooked, didn't clean, do the laundry. So the consequence of that was her boys did all of that. So I started cooking dinner for the family by the time I was in 6th grade. Every night I cooked dinner. My brothers and I rotated going to the laundry. We all knew how to iron and sew and clean. Not, I don't think because of any plan, because my mother worked. And then when she came home, she was going to read. And so that, served me sort of this notion of there is this world inside the home that, food doesn't magically appear on the table. The house doesn't magically get clean. You do it. Right. So as you could tell, I could talk forever about my mother. She was my best friend through college. There was nothing in my life that I did that I didn't tell her about. I was shocked when I went to college and kids had secrets from their parents. I literally was astounded. There was nothing that I did other than my intimate life, which I would tell my mother about, but she made it clear she didn't want me doing it or hearing about it. But there was literally nothing that I did. I never lied to my mother. I never hid things from her. And so, as you could tell, we were very close. She was very important. And as you know, later in my life, when my wife passed away, I tried to mimic, with respect to my daughter, what my mother did for me as a single parent.
So, it's still phenomenal that you had that type of relationship even through your teen years. And, I think about you as a young man going through the New York City public school system and, managing to get yourself into a university like Cornell and then to go to grad school. That's unusual for a young person at that age to be that focused. What was that drive? Was that part because, you want to honor your mother? What was driving that? Or did she show you a part of the world you're like, man, I want to do that?
There was a part of, there were, I think, several things. One is it was just expected, right? Both my parents had gone to college, even though my mother didn't graduate. Yeah. So both my parents had gone to college, and that was the expectation. You went to elementary school, you went to junior high school, you went to high school, you would go to college. So the question was only what you wanted to study at college. One, there was that expectation. Two, my mother embedded in me very early on that I had obligations in the world. And my obligations were to the world. So I had an obligation to develop myself and develop my intellect and my skills so that I could use them on behalf of other people. So I wanted to get out of the projects, no question.
Right.
But it never occurred to me until much, much later in my life that I should make a lot of money. That was never part of the plan. The plan was, how do you serve? How do you develop your talent and then serve? And as you know, I spent most of my career in public service in various government positions along the way. And that was what my mother sort of pushed us to do. So it was, you read, you did your homework every day. You would then get these little trips and these side things and all of these things that none of my friends in the projects got to do. The museums and the plays and the, symphony. When I was in 4th grade, I said to my mother, she said, what do you want for your birthday? And we had no money. But I wasn't really aware of that as a kid. And I said, I want to play the trumpet. I want trumpet lessons. I had no idea what it cost, what that meant. And my mother, instead of saying to me, we really can't afford it, my mother said, okay, as long as you promise to practice. And so she gave me trumpet lessons from 4th grade. And I became a music major through high school. I thought I was going to be a classical trumpet player in a great orchestra in the world until my lack of talent caught up with me a little bit. But that was my mother. It was like, if you're exploring the world, if you're getting better, I'm going to make that happen for you. And look, there were things along the way that we didn't have, but we were never focused on that. And so education was just a piece of that. Just another piece, my oldest brother, Robbie, got into Harvard. And chose not to go because he graduated college in 1969 in the middle of the Black Power movement, in the middle of the Civil Rights movement. And so he went to Virginia State College, where both my parents had gone, because he wanted to honor that and go in that way. He came home after his first semester over Christmas break, and he said to me, you will not go to a Black college, you will go to the Ivy League. I didn't really know what the Ivy League was. My oldest brother didn't really talk to me ever. So when he said that to me, I just accepted that as gospel. That was what was going to happen. I didn't know who that was or what it meant. I wish he had told me. I don't wish he had told me more because my life has worked out incredibly well. But I applied to 5 colleges, right? I didn't visit any of them because we didn't do that then.
Yeah.
I applied to 5 colleges, all in New York State. So I applied to Cornell and Columbia, SUNY, Binghamton, NYU. And the 5th was University of Notre Dame because I love their football team. That's how deep my thought process was. I wasn't going to play, but I liked their football team. I'll apply. And then when I got into these schools, I had to make some choices, and I just wanted to get out of New York City. I had a $1,000 Regent scholarship, which to me was just a fortune. I didn't know anything about financial aid. I didn't even think that far. And so I said, I'll go up to Cornell, which turned out to be in many ways like the right place for me.
That's so great. So as you graduated from law school, began your career in law, it's always interesting to kind of hear about people's first few years of taking off in a career. Were you fortunate enough to get some good advice or some mentors to kind of speak into it? And
I was really lucky. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Joe.
No. And the second part is like, what advice would you give people like that may be in that stage of the career listening in? So love to kind of hear both sides.
So I'll tell you quickly about my experience. When I graduated law school, I knew I didn't want to go to a big law firm in New York. I felt that wasn't the right kind of place for me. It was depersonalizing. So I went to this boutique law firm that no longer exists in New York. And I was brought there by the lead partner at the firm who had been a Cornell graduate. So he would come every year and interview graduating Cornell students. He interviewed me. We hit it off. He brought me in for the summer after my second year of law school. And when he brought me in the very first day, he brought me into his office and he said, so I'm going to tell you that the law firm took a vote about whether or not to bring you in. There are 33 partners in this firm, and the vote was 17-16 not to bring you here. And he said, but I'm the most powerful partner, so I got to overrule it. and you're here. I was the first Black person to ever work at the law firm. I'm not the first Black lawyer, the first Black person. So there was no administrative staff person. There was no, secretarial staff, no one at the firm. And so we talked about that. And he said, Steve, so I'm going to tell you what you have to do. And he said, these rules are not going to apply to John, who was the other first year that they brought in with me. And so he said, but here's what it is. And he said, you're going to have to come in every day. You will never take off your jacket in the office. You'll never loosen your tie. You will come in an hour before we get in. So most people get in at about 8:30. You'll be in at 7:30. I'm going to put your office near the elevator bank. So when people come in off the elevator bank, they'll walk by your office every day. They're going to see you're in there.
Wow.
You're never going to leave. You're going to walk around the floor. We had a floor on at 499 Park Avenue in Manhattan. And he said, you're going to walk the floor. And if in walking the floor, there are more than 5 partners still here, you will not leave. You'll go back in your office, you'll work. And then he talked to me about the standard he was going to hold me to. And at the time, I was a little bit furious. I was like, why are these rules being set in place for me, for John, who was sharing an office with me? They didn't apply to him. And what I came to realize is he was sort of saying to me, these are the things you need to do to be successful here. And he was telling me in a very straightforward fashion, which I ended up appreciating. Having said all of that, my first year, I was a disaster. At the end of the year, a partner who did the reviews for all of the associates, he would start with the most senior associates, he would work down to the most junior, and then all the associates would go out for drinks and dinner. That was the tradition. And so everyone is going through. The first day he gets through half the associates, and they're finally getting down to the youngest 2, John Watt and myself. And he says to John, John does his review, John comes in, but because I had been working the hours that my partner worked, I was like the 3rd highest billing hour-wise associate at the firm. So John Watt, after his review, came into the office and says, okay, this partner wants to talk to you. I shall not name him. And he said, you're going to do great. My review was great. I got a great raise. I got a bonus. You're going to do great. And so I went into this partner's office and he said to me, I was one of the partners who voted for you not to come here because I didn't think we needed a Black lawyer at this firm.
Wow.
And he said, what do you want out of your career? And I said, I want to be a great lawyer. And he said, okay. And then for the next hour, he ripped me apart. And after about 5 minutes, so I'm this tough inner city, right? Marcy, housing projects, Bed-Stuy, tough guy. I'm sitting there and the only thing I'm saying to myself is, you cannot cry. You cannot sit here and cry. I hear nothing he's saying to me. At one point, he pulls out some memo that I had written and he flings it across the desk and it slides across his desk and it hits me in the chest and it falls on the floor. And I can't even pick it up. I just look down at it on the floor and I can just see he scribbled all over it. And he talks for 40 minutes. I hear none of it, other than it's all criticism.
Yeah.
You aren't good at this, you don't do that, well, you don't do that. And I'm thinking, oh, he's just racist and he's a bad person. And he already told me he didn't want me here and didn't think Black should be here. And at the end of the review, I take up that memo he had flinged at me, and I go to my office where the 23 other associates are piled in, waiting for me so they could all go out. And I said to them, oh guys, I can't leave now because there are still more than 5 partners, because everybody knew that was my rule. And you guys go out and I'll join you, which I never do. And about 2 weeks later, I went back to this partner. And I said, I was really surprised by this review because during the course of the year, people had said I was doing well. I've been doing this kind of work. And he said, well, you told me you wanted to be great. If you want to be good, you're on your way to being a good attorney. But if you want to be great, this is what you have to do. And I came back with that memo, which I had read all of his comments.
Yeah.
And he said, that's not a great piece of writing. It's fine for a first-year lawyer, but you want that to be a great piece of writing. And the smartest thing I ever did was I looked up and I said, will you help me? Mm-hmm. And he literally, I remember he sits back in his chair and he says, yes, here's what you're going to do. Every assignment that you have, 48 hours before it's due, you're going to complete it and give it to me. I'm going to take 24 hours to go over it, and then I'm going to give it back to you with all the corrections that you need to make. And that's what we did for a year.
Wow.
If the assignment was due Friday at noon, by Wednesday, I'd give it to him. He would mark it up, and I would start to learn. And I would ask him about it. Why did you say that? Or why did you think that sentence structure was wrong? He gave me, I'll never forget, a copy of Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. It's this little tiny book. Everyone should read it. He was like, read it and learn it. And it was about how to write clearly and well and succinctly.
So good.
And so at the end of that, so now it's the end of my second year, and now I've been trained by this guy for the full year, and I am a much better lawyer. And he looks at me at the end of in my second year review, and he says, if you want to be a great litigator, you have to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. That's where all the great litigators come from. And I thought, oh, he just wants me out the firm. I didn't really know much about the U.S. Attorney's Office, other than I knew I didn't want to be a prosecutor. I came from the inner city like that. Those weren't my people. And he says, no, you want to go. You'll learn how to try cases. You'll go there. You'll spend 3, 4, 5 years, and then you'll be ready to come out and try cases. And that's why I applied to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Wow. It was no great plan. It was because of this guy who originally had told me I was not very good, and then helped me become a much better lawyer.
That's amazing.
So what I would tell people, spend your first 2 or 3 years working on your craft. Find someone who will help you work on your craft. That may be in your place of work or in your law firm if you're a lawyer. It may be that it's someone outside where you're going to seminars, or there's some independently given course, or your bar association or whatever association that you're in, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or a financial person or whatever, that where they give courses. Yeah. Go take them and learn your craft and devote yourself. One of the things he said to me is, because he was talking to me about spending 4 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So he said, you should think of the first 7 years that you're a lawyer as you're just learning. And that's when you'll look up and see. And so I, for some reason, just adopted, it was going to take me 7 years. And that all of my time up until then was about me perfecting this craft and being as good at it and learning to take criticism. And, one of the things I told my daughter, and it came out of this experience, is the people who criticize you are your friends. Whether they mean it in a nice way or they mean it to be mean to you, they're letting you know what at least somebody thinks about you or your work. And then it's up to you what you do with that. And sometimes you can discard it because it isn't coming from a good place or it isn't really true. But if you really look at it, there's something in there that you might say, there are these people who think that about me that I want to change. And so I took that as a really hard lesson.
That's so good. I love the fact that it's not like nowadays, like I've definitely talked to some young professionals where they'll just go grab content online. But I feel like what you're telling me is it's not just the content, but it's that relationship with the one who's giving you advice. And that's where the power really is.
Charles, as you know, and I know you believe this a lot in our relationships, I'm about relationships.
Yeah.
I'm about how do you connect with people, and at different times of your life, the kinds of connections may be slightly different, but it is all about how do you find those people in your life that are going to enhance your life and whose lives you can enhance.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I talk to a lot of my proteges about, every now and then I'll walk into their office and I'll say to them, what have you done for me? And it's not that I need or want them to do anything for me, but I want them to be thinking about that, because a relationship is two-way.
Yeah.
People think about the protege, mentor, protege, sponsor relationship as this older person who is doing these things for you. And as I tell my people, that's not a relationship. A relationship is about me figuring out what are the things I can do for you. And they may not be in kind. They may not be the same kind of thing you can do for me because you're in a different relationship to power or to access to information or things than I am. But what is it I can do? And one of the things I can do is I can get to know you. I can get to know a little bit about some of the things you care about. And I can try to plug into as much of that as possible. Absolutely. One of the things I say to my proteges is, and anyone who knows me, and you know this, no, the only thing I care about is my daughter. That's what I care about. And so if you want to connect with me, as you've already done, as you do every time that you see me, how is your daughter, Steve?
Yeah.
I know she's in med school. How is that going? You ask me, right? Because that's what matters to me. It isn't that you bought me a present or a tie or something. It's you've connected to me and you've learned enough about me to know what matters to me, what I care about, and then you connect to that. And so I'm a big believer in relationships. Relationships saved me throughout. Relationships gave me all of the opportunities that I had to be better, to learn, to grow. So, I know you, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past.
I love it.
I think relationships and building relationships are everything.
I love it. So now you came from the projects, you get into an Ivy League school, you come out and you're learning about the legal profession. You're doing all of this work and your career appears to be kind of skyrocketing. And during this time, as you're advancing in your career as a judge, you experienced the loss of your wife.
Yes.
I could only imagine how devastating that was. And I believe your daughter was fairly young at the time.
Yes.
And so, when something like that happens in the midst of this type of upward trajectory, obviously you naturally will reprioritize things. How did you as much as you're willing to share, how did this moment in any way transform your life or reprioritize how you were going to advance in the rest of your career?
Yeah, it changed everything. It changed everything personally. It changed everything professionally. And again, I know but like my wife was the love of my life. My wife was actually my law professor. We started going out after I graduated. So she was this woman who was brilliant, smarter than me, both my teacher and my companion and my friend and my wife. And so we, at that time, were living in New Haven. She became a professor at Yale Law School. And so we moved to New Haven. I left the FBI at the time and moved to New Haven because I had promised her that if either one of us found the job of our dreams, that the other would accommodate. I, of course, being a man, thought that meant I would find the job of my dreams and she would accommodate. But in the world of law professors, tenured professor at Yale Law School is about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And so we moved to New Haven and we were happy. At the time when she became ill, first breast cancer and then leukemia, I was the U.S. attorney in Connecticut. And I made the mistake of literally saying to her one day, our life is perfect. She was a professor at Yale. She made more money than I did. We had our daughter, who at the time when I became U.S. attorney was 8 or 9. I was the U.S. attorney in Connecticut. I loved my job. My career was more than I ever dreamed it would be. We were this happy unit. My wife had breast cancer, lumpectomy, chemotherapy, radiation, and was in remission. 6 months later, diagnosed with leukemia, goes in the hospital. So let me tell you one quick story about that, and then I'll finish answering your question. So when it's determined that she has leukemia, we decide to get a second opinion. And so we go to what was then called the Hutchinson Center out in Seattle, where at the time they did more cancer work than either Dana-Farber or Sloan Kettering in New York. We were working with Yale New Haven and Sloan Kettering. We wanted another opinion. We go out and we meet with this doctor and we say to him, I think I probably told you this story, but I say to him, we're adults. Literally, hi, how are you? We're adults. Don't sugarcoat it. Just tell us what you think. We can take it. And he looked at my wife and he said, you're going to die. And we were like, okay, wait a minute. I know I said the adult thing. Let's back that up a little bit. And then for 4 or 5 hours, he walked us through the genetics because he had looked at her down to a genetic level and had seen, genes that had spliced off and rejoined other genes. And he basically said, someone with this cannot survive. What I suggest you do is you take your daughter out of school and you'll get about 6 weeks and you do whatever's on your bucket list. He says, otherwise you're going to spend a year in a hospital. They're going to give you round after round of chemo. If you're lucky, you'll get a bone marrow transplant and you're going to die. And so that was obviously devastating. We go home, we talk to our doctors here. They say, no, we can get you through this. And we decide, and because also the notion of just giving up didn't make sense, wasn't who I am, who my wife was. But he was right. She spends the next 10 months of her life in the hospital. She goes through 5 separate rounds of chemo treatments. None of them work. She was lucky enough to find a bone marrow donor from somewhere in Great Britain. The bone marrow doesn't take. And we find out there's nothing else they can do for her. She's going to die. My daughter is 9 when she goes in the hospital, turns 10 that year. My wife dies in June, the year before my daughter's between 5th and 6th grade. And it made me go back to basics, literally basics. Who am I? What do I care about, right? Because 6 months ago, I was a father, a husband, and the U.S. attorney.
Yeah.
This all happened after the Bush-Gore election. I'm a Democrat. The Democrats were out, so I was no longer the U.S. attorney. I was no longer a husband, and I was a father in a very different way, i.e. in sole role of responsibility to my daughter. And so it made me go back to basics, like, what do I care about? And as I said earlier, it made me reflect a lot on my mother, who found herself in the position of being a single mother of 3 boys without money. At least I had, a fair amount of money. My wife and I had saved a little bit of money. And it made me go back and reflect, what do I care about? Yeah. In 10 years, in 20 years, what do I want to look back on this period and say I accomplished? Was it career things, which had always been a big focus? Was it relationship things that I think I need to get in another relationship because that's what makes me whole, and that's what, and what I decided was it was my daughter. My daughter was 11. She was devastated. She was very close to her mother. Even though I thought I was doing 50-50 in the relationship, this made me see that I probably was doing closer to 15% versus 50%.
Yeah.
And so I decided I was going to focus my energy on her. My first, second, and third thoughts were going to be about what was right for her. So I mentioned earlier, my mother didn't clean, she didn't sew, she didn't cook. Well, now I could do all of those things, and they become incredibly important because I do have to cook and sew the clothes for my daughter and iron and clean the house and do all of those kinds of things. And it didn't force me to look outside for that, either outside to get in a relationship because I needed someone to do those things, or outside. It allowed my daughter and I to become insular. And I devoted up until now, I said, until my daughter finishes her education, I'm going to be about her and what's best for her. And how do I get her ready to enter college? And then how do I do whatever she needs to take the next step in her life? And that became my focus. We were in a fortunate position. I didn't work for the first year after my wife died. Between insurance and money that we had saved, we had enough money we owned our house, so I didn't have to worry about that, and to pay the kind of bills that we needed. And it allowed me to take my daughter to school every day, every soccer practice, every choir, every hip hop dance class, every flute lesson. I was there. I was always taking her there. I always picked her up. So I knew intimately who her friends were, what was going on in her life. And I could set down some very basic rules. One of the things I thought a lot about was, like, my father was a very strict disciplinarian. And I was probably 2, but I decided I only wanted to have a very few rules. And one of my rules was to my daughter, and the main rule was, we don't lie to each other. You get to have a private life. You get to have secrets, but we don't get to lie. So if I ask you something, and that's something that you want to keep locked inside, you don't get to lie to me about it. You get to say, Dad, I don't want to talk about it. And every year at Christmas, I would give her these little coupons. And some of the coupons would be she could give it to me, and it meant you could tell me anything and I couldn't react. I can't punish you for it. I can't address it in any way. And you get to tell me, because for me, I wanted her to tell me. Absolutely. I wanted to know what was going on in her life. I wanted to know what concerns she had. And then I would give her coupons that were sort of, if I asked her something, she could give me a coupon and she didn't have to tell me about it. And if it was something important enough that I thought I really need to know about this, then I would engage her. And there was 1 or 2 instances where I said, sweetheart, I know you don't want to tell me about that, but let me explain to you why I think it's important that I know. Once that happened, and once it happened that she told me something with a coupon that I couldn't respond, but it was about a friend of hers who was doing some very troubling and dangerous things. And I said, sweetheart, let me just talk to you about why I think I need to talk to this person's parents about this. I'll leave you out of the story. I will tell them a different story of how I came upon this information. But I need to tell them, because if this was happening to you and my friends knew about it and didn't tell me, it would make me crazy. So I just worked on like that relationship for the next, from that time to this. And then I had the opportunity to become a judge. And Senator Schumer, it was during the Bush administration, as I mentioned, I'm a Democrat, but Senator Schumer wanted to force President Bush to consider a Democrat. And so I'm living in New Haven. I'm not even in New York anymore. And I had promised my daughter when her mother died that we would stay in New Haven until she went to college.
Wow.
And so when Senator Schumer first called me, I said, no, I'm honored. I am thrilled. It would be the job of a lifetime. I'm sorry. I promised my daughter I'm staying in New Haven. I won't. He had said there's an opening on the Eastern District of New York, which is Brooklyn and Queens, and the courthouse is in Brooklyn. And he said, and I said, I won't do it. I'm going to stay in New Haven for my daughter. And fortunately, he came back to me and said, there's an opening in the Southern District of New York, which is Manhattan, Westchester, the Bronx. And I said, no, it's not that the Eastern District wasn't good enough for me. I can't move. And so I won't. And then there was an opening in White Plains, and he said, Steve, you know what? You can stay living in New Haven and commute to White Plains. And we looked at the rules, and you have to live within 30 miles of some point in the Southern District of New York, which New Haven is not. But the Southern District of New York includes the waters of the Long Island Sound. The Long Island Sound comes to the shore of New Haven.
Yeah.
I live within 30 miles of the Long Island Sound. Hence, I could be a judge in the Southern District.
Wow.
And so that's what allowed me to get there. But even that, which was the job of my life and my dream job, even that I wasn't going to do if it meant my first priority, my daughter, I couldn't live up to my promise and obligation to her.
That's incredible. Well, you've done well. Your daughter just graduated from Duke's Medical School. And I remember you texting me that, at the last minute, she got one of the 4 Dean Awards. You must be incredibly proud, and I'm sure she's already communicated this to you as well, but she must be super grateful and proud that you're her dad. I mean, in my mind, you're like the original girl dad.
Well, she hasn't communicated it in quite that way.
Yeah.
But first, I am unbelievably proud of, separate and apart from the graduation of medical school and the Dean's Award, which are incredible, of the person that she is.
Yeah.
She is her mother's daughter. She is a person who cares about other people more than she cares about herself. She's a person who thinks of other people before she thinks of herself. I'll tell you one quick story to give you the perfect example of that and how she was this before I took over. Her mother, I think I may have told you this story also, Charles, because I bored you with all these stories of my life in the past. But her mother passes away. My daughter's 11, and she cries every night. Yeah. I take her to bed. It's 8 o'clock is her bedtime. She cries until midnight, 1 in the morning, until literally to exhaustion. And I can't get her to stop. I sing to her. I do math problems with her. I tell her stories. I, demand that she go to sleep. I do all these things. And this goes on for 2 months. It's June and July. And it literally now, it gets 1 o'clock every morning. I'm exhausted. I now am in my own head about my feelings about my wife having just passed. And I can't do this anymore. And I go to this guy, Steve Marins, who ran the Yale Child Study Center. We were friends. And I said, Steve, you got to help me. And he said, Steve, your daughter really respects you. Tell her to go to sleep. And I looked at him like, are you kidding me? I mean, what do you mean tell her to go to, I tell her to go to sleep every night. He says, no, here's what you do. Let her cry for 1 minute. Put your hand on her arm and say, sweetheart, that's enough for tonight. We'll talk about it in the morning. Mm. I get in an argument with him. Are you crazy? Nonetheless, that night she's crying again. I put my hand on her arm. She has tears flowing down her face. I put my hand on her arm. I say, sweetheart, you know what? That's enough for tonight. We'll talk about it in the morning. She stops crying immediately. She rises up. Tears are streaming down her face. She kisses me on the cheek. I kiss her tear-stained cheek. I said, sweetheart, good night. I love you. And now for the next month, that's what we do. Every night I let her cry. I get it down to now, like tears don't even get out the eyes, right? The tears well up in the eye. Sweetheart, that's enough for tonight. We'll talk about it in the morning. After about a month, she looks at me and she says, Dad, you say that every night, but we never talk about it in the morning. I'm like, oh my God, Steve never told me I had to actually talk about
Follow
it.
up.
And what is the it? I don't know how to talk about it. That's been the problem. And I said, okay, sweetheart, you know what? Tomorrow morning, I'm going to get you up a half hour early and we're going to talk about it. And she said, you know what, Dad? I've been thinking about it and I know what we should do. My daughter's 11. I know what we should do. I go, oh, sweetheart, in the condescending way a parent does. Oh, sweetheart, that's so sweet of you. What do you think we ought to do? She looks at me and she says, we need to find a way to turn mommy's death into something good for somebody else.
Wow. That's amazing.
I start crying. She kisses me on the cheek. She says, it's okay, Dad. You can go to bed now. We'll talk about it. And that sentence changed our lives.
Yeah.
It changed the focus of my life, even though it had been partially that, about what this life is about is finding ways to doing good that help other people.
It's so good.
And so, that's who she is, and that's who she is as she graduated last weekend from Duke Medical School, getting the Dean's Award, and that was sort of their recognition of, they talk about it as being the person who epitomizes what Duke Medical School is all about. That's my daughter, right? She's that kid. And I'm so proud of her. She's coming to New York. She'll do her residency with her boyfriend, who also graduated at Columbia, sort of coming in the middle of the COVID storm here.
Yeah.
And I could not be prouder and happier about what's happened with her.
That's amazing. I definitely want to transition a little bit because I do want to talk a little bit about the work that you've done.
Sure.
And, you worked on several high-profile roles, both in the public and private sectors. You worked as the Principal Deputy General Counsel and Special Assistant to the Director of the FBI, where you participated in espionage matters and specifically the Oklahoma City bombing investigation. You were also Assistant U.S. Attorney, like you mentioned, in the Southern District of New York. I only hear about the Southern District of New York or know about it because of the show Billions on Showtime. Right. And so I know that's dealing with a lot of white collar matters, security fraud, narcotics cases. During these time where you are leading teams in these high profile, high stakes type of leadership roles, were there any driving leadership values or principles that helped you make good decisions as a leader?
Yeah, I think so. One thing I always tried to focus on was, one, getting as smart people around you as you can. My mother once said to me, if you're the smartest person in your group, then you're hanging out with a bunch of dummies, right? And, I believe you are always pulled towards the sort of center, the gravitational pull is towards the center of whatever group you're in.
Right.
And so if there are a group of people who read, and that's who you're hanging around with, you'll start to read because that's what they talk about. And that's what if they're into good things, you'll start to gravitate towards good things. If they're not doing some not so good things, you'll gravitate towards that. So my first part of leadership was I always wanted to get the most talented people around me. Sometimes they maybe have challenges, and we all have challenges. Some of their challenges might have been personality or their ability to get along with others. And that was stuff I thought I could work with. I wanted to get the smartest people around me. Hopefully, they would all be smarter than me, because then they would bring me more towards understanding things that I didn't know. The other thing for me was in working with teams was I wanted every one of my team members to know that I was about them. I was about their knowledge. I was about their career development. I was about their gaining interesting experiences, and I was about them getting credit. And so my view was always, you give credit to the team, you give credit freely, you take it very sparsely, right? Everyone that you work with, they will know how much work you put in, and you don't have to stand up and say it. And so whether I was a team member or the leader of the team, I wanted to give them the credit, give everyone honestly, not fake, because no one wants that.
Right.
But when we're highlighting a certain part of this achievement, you say, that was what Sally, she took the lead in that part, and she was so instrumental in our getting to that solution or in figuring out. So one, I wanted to get smart people around me. Two, I wanted to make them know I am here for you. Right? Not the golden rule, but the platinum rule. I'm here to do what you need to have done. Not what I want you to do for me, because that might be something very different than what you need. My
Right.
job is, as your supervisor or as a leader of a group, is to figure out what you need. And what you need, Charles, might be different than what I need, and so my job is to figure out, how do I activate the best in each person? So to give you an example that I've used for other people when I talk to some of my proteges about supervising is, if you are supervising me, I don't want to see you. I want you to tell me what you want to have done. I want you to give me whatever tools I need to do it. I want you to tell me when I have to get back to you with interim reports or the final report or whatever it is, and I want you to go away, because my boss showing up at my door makes me nervous. When I first became a supervisor, I thought that was the way everyone wanted to be supervised. I'm going to tell you what the assignment is, I'm going to be as clear as possible, and I'm going to leave you alone. Well, that's not everybody.
Yeah.
Some people need and want that boss to show up and just say, how is it going?
Right.
Is there anything I can do for you? What are your challenges? Are there any obstacles in your way that I can help you with?
Yeah.
I always felt if any of those things were true for me, I'm going to ask you. So don't come around. Some people need that. So part of my role as a leader, as a team leader, as a supervisor, whether it was in the U.S. Attorney's Office or at Aetna or as a federal judge leading my chamber staff and others, is for me to figure out what it is you need to be successful, to make you understand that my role is to help you be successful and to help us as a group be successful. So let's figure out those things, and let's try to move away from all of the things that are going to sort of impinge on our ability to do a great job. Because at the end of the day, we're about doing our job really well.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of that another question, and that is, we are in what a lot of people call unprecedented times. And I think leaders, you'll really start to see who the true leaders are. In your career, you've worked on probably cases and problem-solving situations that were completely out of, quote unquote, the box. What advice would you give leaders today as they navigate and lead their organizations or their companies during this season where we're not really sure what the world's going to be like in a month? What goes through your mind
Sure.
if you were in that position?
Well, and even now at my law firm, right, you're working remotely with teams in a different way. So the first thing I always tell people is listen. Talk to any group of people that you want to lead and listen to what they are thinking first in terms of how are they identifying their needs? What are they seeing as the obstacles from that prevent them from doing the kind of job that they want to do? First, listen. And so, with my proteges, I give them exercises. Literally, this will be an exercise. So you need to go to a cocktail party and have this number of conversations where you never talk about yourself. And you carry on a conversation with somebody for 15 or 20 minutes, and you never tell them anything about you unless they ask you a very direct question. So you'll go and introduce yourself. And then the whole point is, I'm going to just ask you questions about you. And there are a lot of good that comes out of that. But so as a leader in these times, first of all, you have to know the people that you want to lead.
That's smart.
And some of that is just talking to them, right? Hopefully you've been working with them and observing them, and you know some of their shortfalls and some of their strengths, and you can play off of those. The second thing is, so talk to them about what they see as their needs. The other thing is, talk to them about how they think you can be helpful to them in this period. Right? We often as leaders tend to think it's all got to come from my head, from me sitting in a dark meditative state over there in the corner, and then I'm going to come out with a brilliant answer. And so in everything I do, and whenever I join an organization, I figure out some way to get people to tell me what they think the organization needs. So for instance, as you know, I'm on the board of Lincoln Center here. And one of the things I sponsored was a prize for people to give the best idea for Lincoln Center going forward. And, X percentage of the ideas are going to be impractical or not very good or not very well thought out, but there will always be that idea or two or three that are either complete or at least a nugget and have a glimmer of the answer in them. So first, I want to talk to you about what do you need. Secondly, I want to talk to you about who you are. Third, I want to talk to you about what ideas that you have. And then the way I try to approach these situations is I sort of say to myself, and it's a drill I do regularly, what would I do if there were no rules?
Mm.
What would I do if there were no restrictions? There wasn't a human resources department. There wasn't people management at my company. There weren't laws in place. Like what? Like, and I'm just trying to open myself up to think more broadly, to not cut off any thought line because I go, oh, they wouldn't let me do that. Or, oh, there's a rule in place. Let's try to be, so I've now had this conversation with you as my colleague or as my protege or as my boss even. What do you think? And give me your ideas. And then I'm going to take all of that in and I'm going to say, well, how do I make that work? And then I want to have as many, because I'm a big conversation, I'm a big people person, have as many conversations. And then I want to just get people back together and start throwing out some ideas. And if it's the one you gave me, I'm going to say, I think Charles came up with this brilliant idea and I've tweaked it a little bit. And this is what I think it might look like and work in this situation in our organization. Because people have, sort of great ideas. They certainly know themselves better than you probably know them. And so, we can come together. I'm not a brilliant person. I like to think I'm a really good people organizer. And so I can listen to you. I can take ideas. I can add my own, sort of flavor and spin and twist on it a little bit. And then I can say, this is how I think it works. And how I think it works in the context of this organization or this time period. So for instance, when the COVID thing happened and my law firm, we're all broken up, everybody's in their own place. I worried a lot, in part of my role as global chair of diversity at my firm, I worried a lot about how do we stay connected to each other.
Yeah.
And so we started to do exercises on that, thought exercises. What do we want to do? So one of the things I said to my team is, after we had been in this for about a month, is everybody, you have to write down the 4 TV programs that you watch that are getting you through this, the books that you've read, the podcasts that you've listened to. Let's share all of that with each other. What are the takeout places that you've gone to and said, oh my God, they have the best X, and this place has the best. Let's share that among each other. So, you're going to share your list with me. I'm going to pick something off your list and we're going to talk about it, right? And so just because we want to figure out how to remain connected, and then in the course of being connected, I can start to engage you not only about the work that we do, but about what are the other things going on in your life, and we can have fun around it. So Insecure on HBO, I don't know if it's a program you watch, but we do like recaps of Insecure. And we all sit around and we love the show, and some people hadn't seen the show, and we sit around and talk about it. And so, just finding ways to connect with people and hear them, and let them know. And even just making the effort, even when you don't come up with the great, brilliant idea, really calms people down. He or she cares about me. They're listening to me. They're taking my ideas seriously, even the ones that they didn't try to activate. And so that's what I think that you do. Now, there are some people who are just brilliant ideas spark out of their own head. I'm not that person. I think I have a lot of good ideas from time to time. But, there are people around you. Get their ideas. You know what? And also, particularly in this period, call up similarly situated people. Literally, people are willing to share across networks, across what in the old days would have been, you're a partner at a law firm that competes with mine. I'm not going to tell you how I did this.
Right.
But in this world, if you call the people, say, how are you staying connected to your people? How are you staying connected to your clients? How are you making this world work? Everybody, because I believe in this world, and this quarantine situation has made it worse. But I just think in the cell phone world, we are dying to find ways to be connected to each other. The cell phone we thought was going to make us more connected, and it makes us less, because we actually talk less and text more and look at that thing more. And so given that, and now we're in a quarantine situation, people who literally I compete against for business, we sit around and talk with each other now about, this is what I did and my client loved it. This is what I did and it made me more connected to my associates during this period. And people across what would be normal divides are willing to share, and I do a lot of that.
I love it. Well, I think it would be a disservice to our audience if I didn't ask you this one last question. and it could be its own separate podcast episode. So maybe we should schedule it. And that is, you have a really holistic understanding of systemic change. Obviously our country has experienced a lot of pain, especially in areas of racism, and it's impacted a lot of minority groups. And I'm talking about like deep pain, fear, confusion, whether or not we will ever be a part of the country in the way that it was promised. And so I know many people listening to this also are part of really a movement of people that says, we got to bring these things to light and think about it and figure out what it means for our companies, our organizations, our communities, our families. So, given the recent high-profile cases of racial injustice in the U.S., what advice would you give people who are listening that say, you know what, I want to make a difference in this society, in this culture? What are some things that they should be mindful of to create systemic change that everyone talks about?
You were right when you prefaced your comments here saying this could be a whole separate podcast. Yeah. Let me start by saying this. This last 3 years of this nation's life has been a little bit of an existential crisis for me. Mm-hmm. As you know, I've spent the majority of my career in public service in the government. I was an assistant U.S. attorney. I worked at the FBI. I was a U.S. attorney in Connecticut. I was a federal judge. I believed in the system and these structures. Not that I believed that they were infallible or didn't make mistakes, but one of the reasons I was willing to join the FBI was I believed I could try to help make it better. Yeah. And that this was an institution that needed good people inside of it doing good work. And these last 3 years, you can guess what was the precipitating event, have really made me sort of say, what was my career about? Mm-hmm. These same institutions that I dedicated so much of my energy, the Department of Justice, being in it in 2 or 3 different roles. Now I look at it and say, they are headed in the wrong direction. Their leadership is disrespectful of the founding of this nation, of the sort of basis of what that institution is all about. And also, so that's one piece that has shaken me. Yeah. And really made me step back and say, did I waste my career spending it in time? I've always seen myself as an inside guy. I would try to work in institutions to make them better and more responsive to people who were out there, who were suffering, people who were disadvantaged, people who grew up like I grew up, people who didn't grow up like I grew up, but needed our institutions to treat them well and fairly. So it was a crisis for me. The other piece is, to be honest, I have also been shaken to my core by the manifest in our face injustice. Mm-hmm. I've worked in law enforcement for most of my career, and you see law enforcement agencies and individuals just literally killing Black people. And that shook me. Not that I didn't know that they were bad apples. As U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, I prosecuted 7 Hartford police officers, right? So it isn't that I didn't recognize that in any organization, X percentage are going to be really bad people and they had the possibility of doing bad things. But the way in which our country, and again, the leadership now, approaches these issues and doesn't address them in an appropriate fashion, people are tried in these cases, but they aren't brought to justice. That has shaken me. Because I was a federal judge, right? And I like to believe that this system that I was a part of was a mechanism for justice and for honesty and for people being appropriately held to account for their actions. And so when you see that not happening, that was shaken. And so here's what I would say to people, and this is what I'm learning. So having, as part of our previous discussion, what I did was I started talking to people. Mm-hmm. I started saying to people, help me think through what my career has and has not meant. Yeah. Help me think through what it is I can be doing now, what it is that I can do. So when the issues around immigration were happening at the very beginning of this administration, I went to JFK with people to help these immigrants file papers. And I ended up because of who I was, like being in a little bit of a supervisory role, looking at the paperwork that other people were writing that were, addressing these kind of concerns. What are the things that I could do? And so one of the things that has happened is I was asked to serve on the Lawyers Committee of the Innocence Project. Mm-hmm. And that was something that I thought I had something I could add. Yeah. And they were helping address people who had been wrongly convicted. It is an amazing organization, but they're not the only one, right? And so the question is, what are the ways for you to get involved? Yeah. And I think people should just look in themselves and say, what is it I care about? There are all sorts of issues, whether it's issues of homeless, or income inequality, or food inequality, or racial injustice. Figure out which of those things you think you can lend your voice to, and then what it is you want to lend. Is it you want to be out front, or you want to march, or you want to be a spokesperson? Is it that you want to be a person who writes to your elected representatives? But I think it becomes, what this is ultimately for me made me say is, I need to get back to basics. I need to get back to figuring out how I can use some money that I've accumulated, how it is I can use position to be of service, again, directly for people. So one of the things is I am the only civilian and the civilian representative on the New York City Police Department's Terrorism Committee. Mm-hmm. And it is my job to make sure that every terrorism investigation is done appropriately according to law, that they are not profiling people, that they are not doing anything, that they're initiating investigations with enough predicate information. And so it made me step back and say, how can I serve? And I think that's a question that's answered differently for different people. Absolutely. Based on your skills, your abilities, your knowledge, your inclination. Some people are much more upfront type people. I've always seen myself as an insider. I want to get inside and try to change organizations as much as I can, or at least leave a mark that is a guidepost for the next person that wants to come along and sort of piggyback on what I've done, which piggybacked on what people before me had done. I just think it's more important than ever to get involved. Yeah. I've been talking to people about how in this next election cycle, how can I get involved in the best, most meaningful way? Is that poll watching somewhere? Is that helping get out the vote in communities where people can feel safe? Is that serving people food who are waiting on what will unquestionably be long lines to vote? Like, what is it that we can do that makes our democracy better and stronger? Because I do believe in it, but we are at a very perilous time. I've never felt so afraid for our democracy. I've never seen it undermined. There have been presidents that weren't of my party or weren't thinking about social issues in the same way. I've never seen the attack on the system, the attack on judges, the attack on the courts, the attack on our former president, the attack on every social institution and safe net that we've set up, whether it be Social Security. How can anyone look at us with a straight face at this time and say, we don't need universal health care of some kind, is beyond me, given where we are as a nation. How we can see that people can think that we don't need a real social sort of net under people that won't allow, the latest numbers are we're going to have 25 to 30% unemployment. How can that be okay without some network in place that makes sure people get to eat and people have their health care? So we as a society have a lot to think about, and it's all hands on deck, in my view. And this is not only a Democrat issue. I think good Republicans who care about this country and care about democratic, institutions and structures, they need to get involved. They may not come at the issue in the same way that I might. I am as radicalized as I've ever been. I never saw myself as a radical. I always saw myself as a liberal, but not a radical. I am much more in that place now. Because I've never seen anything like this, and it makes me more than a little bit sad.
Well, this has been a full conversation. I feel my soul is full, and I appreciate your story. Always loved speaking with you, and I'm sure those listening in have gained a lot as well through this time. And so thank you so much for investing in our audience. And until our next conversation, I guess this is goodbye for now.
Goodbye, my friend, and thank you so much. I've enjoyed this immensely, and what you're doing by talking to people and then sharing that with others is the greatest form of fellowship and friendship and support that we have. And so until we're in each other's presence again, my friend, so good to see you and thank you so much.